It was Beatrice's wedding day, a young woman who was both intelligent and hopeful, always believing in true love. The anticipation was high. Everything had been perfectly planned. The hall decorated with white flower arrangements, the altar adorned with candles, and the guests eagerly awaiting the big moment. Beatrice was in the dressing room, surrounded by friends adjusting her gown and touching up her hair. Her smile reflected the happiness and excitement of fulfilling her dream of marrying Conrad, her great love. But as she was finishing the final details, Beatrice's phone rang. It was a message from an unknown number. With trembling hands and a racing heart, she opened it. The content was devastating. A series of photos and messages of Conrad with another woman. The images showed her fiancé in compromising situations, clearly indicating that he was involved in a parallel relationship. The evidence left no doubt. Beatrice felt the ground crumble beneath her. The reality was overwhelming, and she couldn't believe that Conrad, the man she trusted so deeply, had betrayed her. Beatrice felt an intense pain, as if something were breaking inside her. Her friends noticed the pale look on her face and her shocked expression, but she tried to hold back, rushing out of the dressing room. She needed air. She needed to understand what to do next. She went to one of the garden areas, trying to hold back her tears. Memories of happy moments with Conrad flashed through her mind like a movie. Every promise, every word of love now felt empty, meaningless. However, something inside her already knew there was no going back. She couldn't ignore what she had seen. Leaving Conrad waiting at the altar seemed scandalous, but the pain and indignation were stronger. She knew that the wedding could not go on. Slowly, taking deep breaths, Beatrice made a difficult and courageous decision. She would return to the dressing room, gather her things, and leave without saying a word. As much as her wedding dream was about to fall apart, she knew she didn't deserve someone who would fail her with such betrayal and disrespect. Still in shock from Conrad's betrayal, Beatrice gathered the strength to leave the dressing room. With one last glance at the hall, where friends and family waited eagerly, she felt the weight of every step toward the exit. She knew she had to escape that situation, that ceremony that now meant nothing. It was as if an invisible force was pulling her away from everything that represented this day, which had now become a bitter memory. Outside, the wind brushed against her face, and finally alone, she allowed the tears to fall freely. Beatrice walked aimlessly through the nearby streets, still in her wedding dress, trying to process what had happened. Each step was marked by a mix of pain and indignation. Her mind replayed past moments with Conrad, searching for any sign she might have missed or any mistakes she might have made. Eventually, Beatrice stopped at an isolated park, with empty benches and trees offering a comforting shade. The silence around her allowed her to hear her own thoughts and to feel the intensity of what had just happened. She needed time to collect herself, to understand what her life would look like moving forward. The dream of a happy marriage was now shattered, and she felt lost, unsure of where to begin. As she sat on a bench, lost in her emotions, Beatrice looked around and noticed the contrast between the park's tranquility and the storm inside her. For the first time, she felt the impact of being alone, facing an uncertain future, but also with a newfound freedom she hadn't anticipated. As painful as this experience was, part of her knew she would survive. It would be a long path, but the first step had already been taken. After hours lost in her own thoughts, Beatrice remained seated on the park bench, watching the leaves sway in the wind and taking in the peaceful silence around her. She felt the deep pain of betrayal and the uncertainty of what would come next. That was when she noticed a figure approaching, a man with a calm demeanor, graying hair, and simple clothing, walking toward her with a look of curiosity, but also respect. This man, named Elliot, noticed Beatrice's expression, clearly marked by suffering. There was something about his posture and the way he looked at her that didn't feel invasive. On the contrary, there was a genuine concern in his gaze. He approached her calmly and, keeping a respectful distance, spoke softly. "Sorry to bother you, but you look like someone who could use someone to talk to. May I sit?" Beatrice, still a bit hesitant, looked at him for a moment. She didn't want to open up her life to a stranger, but at the same time, she felt that this man, with his inexplicable calmness, might be the company she needed at that moment. She nodded, allowing him to sit beside her. Elliot introduced himself with a gentle smile, mentioning that he also frequented the park to reflect on life. In a calm voice and with an understanding look, he began talking about the importance of finding peace in difficult times. Without directly asking her what had happened, Beatrice realized that, listening to his words, A slight feeling of relief was emerging. Elliot seemed to understand the intensity of what she was feeling without pushing for any intimacy. Feeling an unexpected sense of security, Beatrice briefly shared the reason for her pain. She spoke about Conrad's betrayal and the devastating impact it had on her life. Elliot listened attentively, without judgment or interruption. When she finished, he simply told her that some people enter our lives to teach us lessons, and that sometimes, these moments are just the beginning of something greater. The conversation with Elliot brought an unexpected sense of calm to Beatrice. Even though he was a complete stranger, his presence and his words helped her see a glimmer of light at the end of this dark moment. She stood up from the bench with a bit more inner strength, knowing that this encounter had planted a small seed of hope. In the days following her encounter with Elliot, Beatrice was still processing the pain of Conrad's betrayal and trying to find meaning in what lay ahead. Yet, she felt a strange peace whenever she recalled her conversation with the stranger in the park. Elliot had touched her soul in a way she didn't entirely understand. There was something about his presence, his calm and gentle words, that brought her unexpected comfort. Beatrice decided to return to the park where she had met Elliot, hoping to see him again. She wanted to thank him for his help and perhaps hear more of his reflections on life. When she arrived, to her surprise, she found Elliot sitting on the same bench. He seemed lost in thought, with an expression that conveyed serenity, but also a hint of sadness. Seeing her approach, Elliot smiled kindly, as if he had been waiting for her. Beatrice sat beside him, and the conversation flowed naturally. She shared more about her life with him, talking about her broken dreams, her frustration, and the sense of failure that had followed her since the wedding day. Elliot, in turn, listened attentively and offered words of understanding, as though he could feel the depth of each wound she bore. After some time, curious to know more about the man who had helped her so much, Beatrice asked what brought him to the park. With a distant look, Elliot revealed that he, too, was dealing with his own sorrow. He spoke of the love of his life, a woman named Annabeth, who had tragically passed away years ago, leaving a void he still carried. Her loss had changed him, leading him to seek solace in simplicity and silence, finding peace in places like that park. Elliot's revelation deeply moved Beatrice. She felt an even stronger connection with him, as they both carried emotional scars that, though different, united them in a unique way. For the first time, Beatrice felt she was not alone in her pain. By the end of that conversation, she realized that Elliot was more than a stranger. He was someone who understood suffering in a genuine and profound way. After her encounter with Elliot and the revelations they shared, Beatrice began to reflect deeply on her own life. Elliot's words echoed in her mind, like a silent call to let go of the pain from the past and find a new purpose for the future. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Her whole life had revolved around building a home with Conrad, and now all of that had become nothing more than a bitter memory. Inspired by the strength she found in her conversations with Elliot, Beatrice made the decision to start over. She decided to leave the city for a while, seeking a place where she could reconnect with herself, far from the memories and people that made her relive the pain. She said goodbye to only a few people, those who truly mattered, explaining that she needed time and space to heal. Upon arriving in her new city, Beatrice experienced a mix of fear and hope. She rented a small apartment on a quiet street and began adapting to her new routine. Gradually, she found a simple job at a local bookstore, where she spent her days surrounded by books and strangers. The peaceful environment brought her an unexpected calm, allowing her to reflect and rebuild herself, even if slowly. Beatrice still remembered Elliot's words about finding peace in difficult times, which encouraged her to keep moving forward. Each day felt like a personal victory, a small accomplishment that helped her let go of the shadows of her past. She still felt Elliot's presence in her thoughts, like a silent guide helping her find the strength to walk her own path. Over time, Beatrice began to realize that starting over didn't mean forgetting her pain, but learning to live with it in a way that wouldn't imprison her. She discovered there was more to herself than her relationship with Conrad, and that self-love was the first step toward a truly free future. Beatrice was finally beginning to feel lighter, living her peaceful routine in the new city, when she was taken by surprise with an unexpected visit. One afternoon, while arranging books in the bookstore, she heard someone calling her name with a familiar voice that sent an immediate chill through her. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Conrad, the man who had broken her heart and left her in pieces. He stood there, more vulnerable and determined than she had ever seen him. Conrad explained that it had taken him time to come to terms with the end of their relationship, but after months of reflection, he couldn't let Beatrice go without at least trying to repair the damage. He was willing to do whatever it took to win her back, acknowledging the mistakes he had made and promising to change. His voice was filled with regret, and his eyes showed a deep sorrow. Beatrice, however, felt conflicted. On one hand, she still carried painful memories and wounds from the moments they had shared. On the other, she couldn't deny that part of her still had feelings for the man who, despite everything, had been her great love. She listened to him patiently, feeling a mixture of emotions: anger, sadness, and even a certain nostalgia. In the end, Conrad asked Beatrice to consider giving him another chance. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to wait and rebuild her trust little by little. For him, the love they shared was worth one last effort. However, Beatrice knew that to make any decision, she would need time. She thanked Conrad for his sincerity but told him that she still needed to understand her own feelings better before deciding. When Conrad left, Beatrice felt the weight of that encounter. Her life had seemed stable until that moment, but now she faced a new crossroads. She wondered whether she should move forward and close that chapter once and for all, or if love still had a place in her life. After her encounter with Conrad, Beatrice felt the need to reconnect even more with herself before making any decisions. Conrad had promised changes, but she knew she needed a solid foundation, something that came from within herself, to support any future choice. Determined to maintain her emotional independence, Beatrice threw herself wholeheartedly into the life she was building in her new city. At her job in the bookstore, she began engaging more with customers and the local community. She found solace in the peaceful routine, in light-hearted conversations, and in small interactions that made her feel part of something again. Beatrice started attending cultural events and formed new friendships, particularly with Nadine, a wise and spirited woman who had also faced romantic disappointments. Nadine became a kind of guide for Beatrice, offering valuable advice on how to move beyond the past and open herself up to new possibilities. Nadine's influence helped Beatrice realize that her life was much more than the relationship she had left behind. She felt stronger, more connected to herself, and more confident in her worth. Elliot, though physically distant, remained present in her thoughts as a symbol of silent support. She no longer felt alone or vulnerable, but rather capable of shaping her own destiny. Beatrice began exploring hobbies she'd never had time for before. She enrolled in a painting class, rediscovering an old passion, and started writing small pieces about her journey of self-discovery. Her life now felt richer and more purposeful, something that had seemed impossible just months before. Conrad continued trying to reconnect, but Beatrice set clear boundaries, explaining that she needed time for herself. She still had feelings for him, but now she understood that loving someone wasn't enough. She also needed to be at peace with herself. For the first time, she experienced self-love in its purest form, feeling whole without depending on anyone else. Beatrice was finally feeling secure in her new life, embracing her growth and the new opportunities around her. But even with this stability, the past seemed determined to test her. One day, as she returned from work, she found a letter left at her apartment door. It was from Conrad, who, despite the boundaries she had set, continued trying to reach her in some way. In the letter, Conrad confessed how Beatrice's absence had transformed his life. He detailed the deep regret he felt for his choices and mentioned being on a journey of self-discovery that made him value their love even more. Conrad's words were sincere, filled with emotion and a vulnerability Beatrice had never seen in him before. He pleaded for one last conversation, a chance to show that he had truly changed. Beatrice felt torn. On one hand, she knew she had come a long way, building an independent and meaningful life without Conrad's presence. On the other, his words stirred feelings and memories within her that, try as she might, couldn't be erased. She remembered the good times, the plans they had made together, and moments that made her believe he might have genuinely changed. To seek clarity, Beatrice turned to Nadine, her friend and confidant. Nadine listened to every word without interrupting and offered a perspective that made Beatrice reflect deeply. She suggested that Beatrice ask herself whether her feelings for Conrad still had a place in her heart, or if they were merely memories of a past that no longer belonged to her. With this conversation, Beatrice realized she was facing a decision that could redefine her future. Beatrice spent the night reflecting on the letter and on what she truly wanted. Her encounter with Elliot, her new life, her newfound self-love, all weighed on that choice. She knew she was stronger now and that whatever decision she made should be based on what would genuinely bring peace to her heart. With Conrad's letter still on her mind, Beatrice felt she needed more time to find herself and clarify her feelings. She sought a way to reconnect with her emotions and understand what she truly wanted for her future. Amid this process, she felt the urge to see Elliot again, the man who had been so instrumental in her new perspective on life. One day, Beatrice returned to the park where she had first met him. To her surprise, there was Elliot, sitting on the same bench. He greeted her with his usual serene smile, but Beatrice noticed something different in his expression, as if he too were going through a period of self-discovery. They talked for a while, sharing stories and reflections. During the conversation, Elliot, who had always been reserved about his personal life, decided to share something he had never mentioned before. With a deep and sincere tone, he told Beatrice that, in addition to losing Annabeth, his beloved, he had lived in solitude ever since. He had shut himself off from the world for many years, overwhelmed by the pain and guilt over her loss. Her death was not just a loss but an event that had changed him irreversibly. Beatrice listened intently, realizing the weight of Elliot's story. He had closed himself off from the world, avoiding connections out of fear of reliving the pain of losing someone. However, since meeting Beatrice, he had felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years. Elliot revealed that she had helped him realize that life could still offer something valuable, even if the past could not be changed. This revelation deeply moved Beatrice. Elliot, who had always been a symbol of strength and serenity for her, also carried a vulnerability he was only now sharing. She felt that, in some way, they had both helped each other heal. Beatrice understood that Elliot's life bore scars as deep as her own and that, together, they might be able to start anew in a way neither of them had imagined. By the end of that conversation, Beatrice felt closer to Elliot than ever. The bond between them was now even stronger, rooted not only in friendship but also in mutual understanding and the silent support they shared. At that moment, she knew that, regardless of her decision with Conrad, Elliot would always hold a special place in her life. After the deep conversation with Elliot, Beatrice realized that the time had come to make a decision about her future. She found herself at a crucial point, where she needed to decide whether to leave the past behind and open herself to something new or to give Conrad the chance he so desperately sought. Each choice seemed to carry its own implications and meanings, and Beatrice felt the weight of each one. In the days that followed, Beatrice reflected on everything she had experienced and on what she truly wanted. Conrad represented a love full of memories, a bond that, despite the pain, still held precious moments. He was someone with whom she had envisioned an entire life, someone who, despite his mistakes, seemed willing to rebuild what he had destroyed. But Beatrice also knew that the broken trust could never be fully restored, and the doubt about Conrad's true commitment remained in her heart. On the other hand, there was Elliot, whose presence brought her a peace and security she had never imagined. He represented a new chapter, a chance to rebuild her life alongside someone who deeply understood her pain and who, like her, had experienced loss. Elliot demanded nothing from her. He only offered his support and understanding, which made her feel both free and safe. Beatrice found herself at an emotional crossroads, where she needed to choose between the familiarity of the past and the promise of a new beginning. She spent nights reflecting on what would truly make her happy, consulting her own feelings and weighing the possibilities. She knew that any decision should be made with sincerity and courage, without being swayed by insecurity or the fear of loneliness. After much reflection, Beatrice made a decision. She would not be guided solely by the past or by fear of losing someone. She would choose what brought true peace to her heart. Knowing that this journey had made her stronger and more independent, she felt finally ready to take the next step. With the time having come to make a definitive decision, Beatrice knew she needed to face both Conrad and Elliot, making it clear to them what she felt and what her intentions were. She wanted to be fair to them, but most of all, to herself. Each man represented a different path and a distinct possibility for her future, and she was finally ready to express what was in her heart. Beatrice arranged to meet Conrad in a quiet cafe, far from distractions and noise that might interfere with the conversation. Seeing him, she noticed how genuinely remorseful he seemed. Conrad spoke about his love and how willing he was to fight to regain her trust. He promised he would never make her suffer again and asked her to consider a future together. But Beatrice, who now saw love in a more mature way, understood that promises alone were not enough to sustain a healthy relationship. With calmness and firmness, Beatrice thanked Conrad for all the moments they had shared, but explained that her trust had been broken in a way that could not be restored. She told him that, although she still cared for him, she felt that this chapter of her life needed to be closed. She was not willing to give up everything she had gained in her journey of self-discovery and independence. Conrad, though saddened, accepted her decision with understanding, realizing that Beatrice had indeed changed. After the conversation with Conrad, Beatrice felt lighter, as if she had finally released the weight of the past. The next day, she decided to meet with Elliot for one final conversation. They sat together on the same park bench where they had first met. Beatrice confessed that he had been an essential presence in her life, helping her rediscover the strength she held within herself. Elliot listened patiently, and in the end, revealed his true feelings for her. With a sincerity that touched Beatrice deeply, he told her he was willing to share the future by her side, but that he would respect any decision she made. He loved her but wanted her to be happy, no matter what choice she made. Beatrice felt her heart warm. For the first time, she was making decisions based on her own well-being, without external pressures. She realized that, with Elliot, she could build something genuine and light, free from the ghosts of the past. With a sincere smile, she embraced this new chance, knowing she was choosing not just a partner but also herself. With her decision made, Beatrice felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time, she had chosen her own well-being, following what her heart truly desired. Life with Elliot represented a new beginning, a relationship built on mutual respect, understanding, and freedom. It was the kind of love that asked for nothing in return, allowing her to simply be herself. In the months that followed, Beatrice and Elliot began building their life together, sharing simple yet meaningful moments. Together, they explored the city, rediscovering the world around them with a lightness they had both thought they would never find again. They supported each other through the small victories of daily life and faced any difficulties with calm and patience. Their relationship brought Beatrice a new sense of freedom and fulfillment. She learned that true love wasn't about promises but about presence and respect, about being with someone who genuinely valued and understood her. Elliot, in turn, felt he had finally found a place to lay aside his own scars, feeling loved in a truly authentic way. As for Conrad, he accepted Beatrice's decision and moved on as well. The experience transformed him, leading him to reflect on his own mistakes and strive to become a better person. Despite the initial pain, he understood that love couldn't be forced and that sometimes, the happiness of someone we love is more important than our own desire to have them close. Beatrice's life had taken an unexpected turn, but alongside Elliot, she finally found what she had been searching for: peace, security, and an authentic love. She realized that everything she had gone through, the betrayal, the pain, the rebuilding, had led her to that moment of true happiness. With Elliot, Beatrice had chosen not only love but also herself and the chance to start anew, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel and give it a like, so YouTube will send you many videos of beautiful and moving stories like this one. Thank you.